why you are running for this position. First up, Mr. Clint Didier.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My website is Didier4Congress.org. Please go to my website. Why I'm running for this? Well, Charlton Heston said it well. He said the American dream is not success or riches. It's freedom. Freedom. In the Didier campaign, we have a simple equation. More government equals less freedom. Less government equals more freedom. I've made a pledge, and that pledge is on my website. I pledge no new taxes. Any increase in existing taxes, I will vote no. Anything that grows the size of the federal government, regardless of party, I will vote no, so help me God. You see, there's no compromise. This country's on the verge of collapse financially. I'm going to go back to push a constitutional conservative agenda from the grassroots. I'm a farmer. Just got off a swather today to come up here to talk to you fine folks. I know how to balance a checkbook, and I know how to run a ledger sheet. I will be your representation in the 4th Congressional, and I'm not going back to bargain. So please elect me as your next rep from the 4th. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is George Cicotte. I'm a Republican candidate for the 4th Congressional District seat. I'm running this race because I've got the best skill set and the right mindset to serve this district and to solve critical national problems facing our country. What are those problems? We've got a budget that is out of control. We're dumping $1.2 trillion in debt upon every man, woman, and child in this country. I happen to have a lot of those children. I've got 7 of them. And I see it as a moral and ethical failure to be putting that level of debt on our children. Number 2, I've got the skills to solve the Obamacare mess. I'm an attorney. I've dealt my entire 20-year career helping employers deal with the federal laws governing health care and other employee benefits. I understand these laws inside and out. I know the 1 or 2 good things about health care, and I know many of the bad things that nobody else running this race even realizes are coming down the pike. I can fix those for you. Finally, I went to law school at BYU. BYU Law School was founded just 40 years ago for the express purpose of training leaders who would stand up and defend the Constitution of the United States of America. I'm trained to do that, and I'm prepared to do that. How will I do it? First, we'll rein in the executive branch, who's vastly overreaching right now. Second, we'll restore the federal balance of powers. Third, we'll recreate respect for the Constitution of the United States of America out in D.C., which is effectively lawless right now. I'm working harder than anybody else in this race. I'm working to earn your vote, and I look forward to being your next congressman. Thank you.
Afternoon, everyone. I'm Josh Ramirez, the only independent candidate running for the 4th Congressional District seat. And what a fun ride that is, being the only one. I have 4 kids. I'm married, live in Pasco. I work out at Hanford as an analyst and as adjunct faculty at Columbia Basin College. I'm a U.S. Army veteran, got out back in 2004. I'd like to say thanks to the young professionals of Columbia Basin and Pillar Rock for the invitation to be here tonight. So a little bit on my background. I grew up in agriculture. Obviously, I served in the Army. I've done a little time as a blue-collar worker, so I've spent some time there as a drywaller. Spent my time on unemployment for 6 months during the worst part of the economy. I know how that feels. I got a bachelor's degree in business administration, a bachelor's in accounting and finance, and a master's of science in management. So I am running because I am extremely frustrated with partisanship. You guys remember the government shutdown. The approval rating of Congress is at an all-time low. I think there was only 57 bills passed during 2013, sorry. And that is a failure. So while people need problems resolved, Congress is arguing because partisanship is divisive. So that's my focus, is to unite in the center, and my other focus is bringing jobs home from overseas, because we have shipped 5.5 million jobs overseas, and that's $320 billion we could bring back in wages and $119 billion in tax revenue. So that is my other major focus. Thank you so much.
Good evening. I'm Senator Janea Holmquist, and I would like to thank the young professionals in the Grant County Republican Party and anyone else who helped make tonight a possibility. It continues to be an extreme honor to serve you in Olympia. I have the best bosses in the world, and that's you. And I'm running to be your next Congresswoman in the 4th Congressional District because I want to ensure that my 18-month-old son and your children and your grandchildren and the next generations continue to have the same opportunities at the American dream as you and I have had. And unfortunately, that's really at risk right now, ladies and gentlemen, and I think you guys know that. And while we have a great group of conservatives in this race, what you gain with me is that proven track record to back up my promises and my commitments, my principles, and my ideas. I've been working hard on your behalf in Olympia to protect you, your wallets, and your rights. So let's talk a little bit about your wallets. I want to work to adopt a balanced budget amendment at our nation's capital, and we were able to accomplish that here in this state. Also, I will be your champion against tax increases. I'm your only current sitting senator who has never voted for a tax increase on Washington citizens. Thank you. Protecting your rights, whether it be your property rights, your constitutional rights, your personal liberties, you can count on me, and I got the track record to back it up. Obamacare, we need to replace it and restore the private insurance market with those consumer-driven common sense solutions. Our economy, it depends, and this is one of my passions as Chair of Commerce and Labor for you in the Washington State Senate, but it depends on private sector job creation and economic development. Regardless of the issue, I can't do it alone. I need your help, I need your support, and I'd be so honored and blessed to receive your vote. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for being here. My name is Gavin Seim. I'm actually from Ephrata. I'm here with my lovely wife, Sandra. I'm a small business owner and a father of 3 children. I'm running for Congress because America is losing its freedom and it's losing its jobs. And I'm focused on restoring that by consistent 100% constitutional voting. We have a lot of problems. We have a lot of spending. We have a lot of debt. And what America needs is to rein in their federal government. We have to focus on limited government with pure constitutional voting. The Constitution gives us the enumerations. It says, here is what the federal government is allowed to do. We don't need to fix Obamacare, we need to throw it out because it's lawless and it doesn't represent our republic. We need to reduce taxes and spending and stop the overreach of the federal government. We need to restore liberty in this nation, and we need to focus on limiting government under the boundaries of the Constitution, and that's what I will do when in Congress. But I'll go further than that. My experience and my background is in communicating and starting conversations, and we need to light the brush fires of liberty in America. We need to get beyond just sitting in a chair and voting. We need people that will vote constitutional and that will take that further and help to carry that message of constitutional liberty all across America and to keep those conversations going in DC. So I appreciate your consideration. You guys can check me out at callmegav.com and get pretty much anything you want to know about me there. And I look forward to the questions tonight. This is going to be fun, and I've covered it, so maybe I can save that other time for later. Thank you all.
We are a small population in a large rural district whose views differ from urban areas. How do you plan to make our voice a little louder and be heard?
Thank you, and that is a good question, because quite frankly, any of us who have the opportunity to win this seat, we're all going to be freshman congressmen. We're not going to have the seniority that Doc had when he he's got 20 years right now. So, the word freshman is a little bit appropriate. It does bring back the high school or the college recollections where you're the junior person on the totem pole. My way of being effective in that regard is to bring good, smart, intelligent ideas to the table and to not care who gets credit for them. I want to bring my ideas to the table, and it's been my experience that good ideas are often heard. The only time they're ever shut down is if they threaten those who are in power. And so I don't care about getting any recognition out there. I care about bringing solutions that will work. And so, I'll work to build relationships with other members of the House, and I'll work to bring solutions to them. And I don't care if I get credit. I'll gladly give somebody else the credit if I can help bring a solution that will solve the problems that we mentioned. Balancing the budget, fixing Obamacare, and restoring the vitality of the Constitution in governing our nation. So really, I think it takes a lot of behind-the-scenes work, and quite frankly, I think we've all heard you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. You got to be nice to people. You're not gonna have influence by walking in and demanding my way or the highway. You've got to go in there and be reasonable and effective and bring good ideas. I would also suggest to you that my experience as an attorney in the private sector is very valuable. It's one thing to be a government servant, and they deserve our respect, but the people who pay the taxes in this country are the small business owners, the employees, the workers, not the folks who've been employed in government their entire career. I believe that having that outlook and sharing that outlook, a good common sense outlook out there, I think will be very well received. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, I'll go back to my proven track record as your state senator. I've already proven that you can make sure that you can not only stand strong on our core principles, but we can still get things accomplished. I haven't always been the chair of the Commerce and Labor Committee, and I worked a great portion of my service on your behalf in the minority. And even facing extreme obstacles, even when I was in the super minority status, so that meant the Democrats were in charge of the House, the Senate, and the governor's mansion, I was still able to reach across the aisle and improve our business climate by passing historic workers' comp reform, the largest reform to our industrial insurance system in over 100 years, and that was from a super minority status. So folks, I've got that track record. I can go toe-to-toe when necessary with Governors Gregoire, Governors Inslee, the labor unions when necessary. And I am, bottom line, the most prepared to bring the fight to Pelosi and President Obama and get them to come along to our ideals instead of being forced to take their anti-American socialist agenda. And that's what I'll do for you, and I'll add on to it. I'm blessed that I've already built relationships with those in Congress on both sides of the aisle, whether it be Congresswoman Kathy McMorris or Congresswoman Jamie Herrera, Dave Reichert, not a Congresswoman, of course, Congressman Derek Kilmer, who's a Democrat, and I served with in the Senate, and we served together on the Economic Development, Trade, and Innovation Committee. So not only do you get that proven track record of being able to stand strong and firm to our core principles and still being able to accomplish things, but I've already have the relationships built with quite a group of powerful Congress representatives right now in DC, and I would sure look forward to the opportunity to continue to be your warrior and protect you, your wallets, and your rights. Thank you.
Well, I've already started the process.
Than consistent alignment with the Constitution. Something that we often miss in the United States is that oftentimes it's missed by our representatives when they go back to DC and they implement legislation and bills that are not in line with the Constitution, and according to the founders, were lawless. What I can do is make our voice very loud in DC, and the first way I'm going to do that, the first asset of a freshman congressman is voting no. Because most of the bills coming through the Congress are not constitutional. They're increasing spending, they're increasing taxation, they're increasing the oppression on our jobs, our families, our faith, and our freedom, and we have to put a stop to that. The way we address that, the way we start those conversations, we start by voting constitutional. All I need when I go into the halls of Congress, when I go into a forum like this, is a constitution, because when we're talking about a federal office, that is the entire law for the federal government. And I assure you that when I'm in DC, the conversations I will start about that constitution and about limiting that federal government and taxation and easing our burdens will be very loud for our district. Thank you.
So I think part of that's an obvious answer, being the only independent that's running in the race right now. But there's 51 of us also running across the country right now that is expressing a new frustration with the Democrats versus Republicans. And I think that if several of us independents make it to Congress this year, we're going to see a lot of changes. We're going to see a lot of more unity going on, mediation, going in between the parties. It's hard to say you're bipartisan when you are a partisan, right? So my goal is to be the new independent voice. There are 42% of Americans now who identify as independents, and 65% of millennials now identify as independents. That is the majority of this crowd right here. So the other things that I plan to do, I have a lot of experience in project controls, project management. I've spent time in construction. I spent time at PNNL, Hanford. I grew up on a ranch and a farm. So I have a very diversified background as well as being a veteran. So I plan on working with the Mid-Columbia Energy Initiative. They have a great project they're trying to get off the ground over there near Hanford, working with PNNL and bringing jobs to the district. So my voice is being independent and bringing jobs to the district. Thanks.
Washington State just lost its No Child Left Behind waiver, impacting the funding of every district in our state. How will you fix this national law to help honor our state-level education priorities?
I will fix this state law by making it a state issue and put a bill forward to get rid of the Department of Education. After all, you got to recognize the problem, folks. We're sending our money back to D.C. They keep 34 cents out of every dollar. It comes back to the state. Our own NEA, our Washington State Department of Education, takes 33 cents. We get 33 cents back to the district. Therein lies the problem. No child left behind. Let's get schools to start creating competition. You know, when Joe Gibbs brought in 8 tight ends to take my job every year, he told us, competition brings out the best in everyone. So why don't we create competitions in between the schools? This will bring out the best out of the schools. We're so caught up in no child left behind that we're not pursuing the correct answer, and that is create competition and get education back to being fun for kids to learn. And let's get English as our only language of the United States. That's key. Thank you.
Well, I think part of fixing the problem is obviously having the revenue to cover the hole or the gap that was just created, right? So, also, once again, it goes back to the fact that we don't have enough revenue coming in, right? That's part of the problem. We don't have revenue coming in because we don't have jobs. We don't have jobs because they've all been shipped overseas. So, I think part of the problem is fixing the funding issue. I think once we can have the economy that brings in the tax revenue, that enables people to cover their schools with their district money, with their local and county money, then we won't need the programs that are funded by the federal government to supplement our education. And that's my response. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You know, to open this response to this question, I want to read something, and I know it, but I want to read it verbatim, and it's the 10th Amendment of the United States Constitution. I know I sound like a broken record sometimes, but if we go back to D.C., this is the only mandate, the only law, the rule book that we are duty-bound, that we swear an oath to follow. The 10th Amendment says that the power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively and to the people. And I have to applaud Mr. Didier over here for his response because he's spot on. The Department of Education has no constitutional right to exist. And that is the law. It is the supreme law of the land. So how we address this, how we deal with the funding, is if you consider the massive waste coming from the Department of Education. When you say we need to end the Department of Education, a lot of teachers agree with me on this, but sometimes we gasp. You know, it's such a big thing to take on. But if you end the massive waste and the spending and the government overreach of the Department of Education, of things like Common Core, and you put that where it belongs legally, you give that to the people in the states, the government closest to the people is the one easiest for us to control. And when we have that local accountability, our education will improve, our costs will go down, our pocketbooks will bulge a little more, taxes will be reduced, and liberty will thrive. Thank you.
Thank you. And first off, a clarification is that at this point, it was actually up to your state legislature to a certain degree to not lose this funding. And so basically the federal government came to us with an ultimatum and said, you have to pass, one of the things we had to pass was a teacher evaluation bill. And I voted and supported that, and we were able to get it out of the Senate, but we couldn't get it all the way through the legislative process. And the consequence was, you lost your No Child Left Behind funding. But what I'd love to step back and look at is these sorts of policies. And serving you in Congress, not only, I was the ranking member of the K-12 committee for our Washington State Senate Republican caucus. And so want to be a real advocate for not being forced, and in many cases, the federal government dangles a carrot to the states and says, you know, take this policy and we'll give you money. But then you got to play by their rules. So I got to say one thing is that I would, on representing you at the federal level, is to do whatever I can to help decentralize the Department of Education, give as much authority as possible to your state and local governments so that you as parents can have a say, so that teachers can actually teach, and that students have a greater opportunity to learn and not be treated like the one-size-fits-all that we tend to see coming from our federal level. And one other thing I will mention is it's not just up to your elected officials. A big part of this is when those carrots are dangled in front of your state legislators for these new great policy ideas that can perhaps end up being disastrous consequences, make sure you are loud and vocal to your local legislators. In many cases, it's just not worth taking the carrot, because then you got all the garbage that follows it. Thank you.
I said, let's begin this by putting it in a historical context. I hope everybody in that room remembers who passed No Child Left Behind. It came in under the Bush administration, a Republican presidency, if you can believe that. That shows you that just because somebody has a particular party label doesn't mean that they believe in small government necessarily. So, and once you put a policy in place, you know, clearly the intention of No Child Left Behind was to try to improve the education in America and to show the American citizens, hey, your money is being well spent, and we're trying to pass some tests to show you that kids are getting educated well. I think we can all agree that that hasn't worked very well at all. Teaching to tests, I've got 7 kids. They all tend to be super performers, so the tests, you know, it's just a waste of time for them, quite frankly, and there's a lot out there. At the other end, kids who struggle, even if they learn how to check the right boxes on the test, they're not necessarily learning the right types of skills that are going to get them to where they need to be in life, okay? So we've got to go back and we've got to say, is No Child Left Behind a law that really should even be kept on the books? Perhaps revoking it, repealing it is a strategy. You know, the other thing is to go out there and say, here's what I will do, absolutely no questions asked. That's absurd, because we don't know what the political balance of powers is going to be while we're there. I can tell you the principles that I will pursue, and depending upon what the political balance of powers are I'll get it.
What is your stance on the Affordable Health Care Act, and what one change would you make if you had the opportunity?
Thank you. This is going to be fun, isn't it? I usually like going last because then I get to see what everybody else says and think, but I'm happy to go first on this one. The Obamacare, again, falls under the Constitution. And there's one solution. And I would have to say to any candidate who supports fixing or keeping Obamacare, do you dare to stand before these good people and say that you will violate the fundamental laws of this nation that you're going to be swearing an oath to? And in so doing, violate your oath, admit that you're going to violate your oath before you've even spoken it. Obamacare is unconstitutional. It's unconstitutional because it violates our fundamental rights in the Bill of Rights. It's unconstitutional because healthcare, while we do need to address these issues on the state level, is not at all within the enumerated powers of the United States Constitution. It's unconstitutional because further in the 10th Amendment, as we just read, it says anything not enumerated in this Constitution is reserved to the people in the states. So there's one thing for Obamacare, and it's the chopping block. We throw it in the trash. We do not replace it. We do not fix it. We throw it away because this is America, and we do not have socialist, lawless health care rammed down our throats. Thank you.
Well, first off, as your senator, I've been working to protect you, your wallets, and your rights. And as your congresswoman, I would do the same thing. And the interesting thing with Obamacare is it's not only attacking your wallets, it's a tax increase on many different levels, but it's also attacking your rights, your personal liberties. Bottom line, we've got to replace it. We need to restore the private insurance market with some consumer-driven, common-sense solutions. So you guys are back in the driver's seat. With my campaign and the way that my leadership style has been as your state senator, is that lobbyists are great. They're wonderful. You know who you can figure out which ones you can depend on and which ones not. But I prefer to get my expertise from those on the ground, my bosses within the Congressional District that are in the trenches, on the ground, having to deal with these regulations coming at them from their government. And so I formed a healthcare coalition, and we've got folks from CEOs. We just got on board the Yakima Regional Hospital CEO, to nurses, to radiologists, to pharmacists. We just got a midwife on board. And they are going to be my counsels, my expertise, to give me their wisdom and their hard truths in regards to what we need to do with this situation. And so far, they've come up with a lot of great ideas. And some of the ideas, and if I only would have to pick one, I think I would pick the idea that every citizen should be able to buy their health care insurance with pre-tax dollars, and that it could follow them, portability. You shouldn't have to go and look for new health insurance just because you quit your job or if you move. That should be able to follow you across state lines, similar to life insurance. You get to bring your life insurance with you, but you have to start from square one when you move from Washington to Oregon. It doesn't make any sense. So bottom line, folks, there are some great common sense solutions out there. Our healthcare experts here in the 4th Congressional District in the Columbia Basin, they know what we need to do. It's not rocket science. Thank you.
The opportunity.
Repeal it. I've already signed the pledge to repeal Obamacare. It's one of the reasons why I'm running. My wife and I were canceled because of Obamacare. Now what's the solutions that we need to look at? Because we do have a health care problem. Tort reform. We've got to quit the frivolous lawsuits. You see it on TV every night. There are lawsuits, they're begging for you to sign up to sue. It's got to stop. We want health care, it's got to stop. We need the insurance companies to shop across state lines. Competition brings out the best in everyone. It'll drive down the cost of insurance if we allow the insurance companies to shop across state lines. Third, each and every one of us know that there are people out there on Medicare, Medicaid, Part A, Part B, Part C, Part D, that they've signed up, they paid into it, just like Social Security, they're entitled to it. So I know as a taxpayer that I'm going to have to pay double. I'm going to have to keep paying in for these people that have paid in and that are needing it, the elderly. But then I want the privilege of paying into my own privatization healthcare account, tax-free in, tax-free out. And I can invest it wherever I want. But like an American, this country was founded on rugged individualism, self-reliance, and personal responsibility. I know it's my responsibility where I put my money, not the government's. Thank you.
So, I love it that the issue of Constitution keeps coming up. By the way, I used to be a Republican. But it seems interesting to me that, one, I'm the only one up here that was enlisted in the military of the candidates. And I've already swore to defend the Constitution. And to me, it would seem really easy to just step up and do that again. Secondly, I would like to know what we're going to replace the Affordable Care Act with. It's not necessarily that I agree with it 100%, because I don't, and the individual mandate really makes me nervous. It is unconstitutional, but I would love to see what's going to replace it, because I haven't seen very many ideas. We've shipped 5.5 million jobs overseas. That's a potential impact of another 12 million jobs that have went over with them because of the support functions that support manufacturing jobs, etc. And our average middle class income should be about $19,000 higher a year. But both the Democrats and Republicans have passed free trade agreements, 14 of them, and they're trying to pass another one right now that has shipped all the jobs overseas. So now we've got 47 million people in poverty, and we expect them to have what? I'd like to see an answer, because when we do have an answer, then I'll stand up and support that. But right now, we've shoved them into a hole, and now we're trying to squeeze them even more, and we expect them to be able to take care of themselves. So once we have an answer, I'll probably stand up and support that. Until then, we have to fix the problems. And I don't see any other alternative at this point. Thanks.
What are your intentions for or against regarding immigration reform? What do you propose be done about the illegal immigrant population?
How do we increase supply? More people, more equipment, more insurance. More people, more docs, more nurses, more physician assistants of every type. Get the government out of blocking the number of med school graduates. Get the federal government out of blocking the number of residencies. Allow schools to increase the number of educated providers. Devices. Obamacare taxes them, that results in less of them. We need to allow more R&D to have more medical devices, which can increase the supply. And again, we do need to have greater ability to sell insurance across state lines. Someone else, I think I heard made this comment, the competition in insurance bring prices down. That's absolutely true. We also need more transparency in healthcare pricing. Our legislature had the opportunity to make that change this past February, our state legislature, and they blew it.
That's done.
To special interests. They had the opportunity to...
Okay, our time is up, Mr. Cicotte.
This is one of the biggest problems we got in America. First of all, we got to get our borders secure. How do we do that? Well, I've thought of a pretty simple plan. We've got troops all over the world that are what? What are they doing over there? We're obviously not restoring law and order over there. Let's bring them home. Let's keep a few positions open for tactical movement, but let's bring our troops home. What are we going to do when we bring them home? Well, let's ask those landowners down there on the Mexican border and on the Canadian border for a half a mile or a mile of easement, and let's let them train there. In 2007, our military was on the border. Our government put them there without any ammo in their guns. The federales stormed one position. They had to retreat. They had nothing to fight back with. Nothing came across the border when our military was there. Get an easement, let them train. Okay, the people that are here, we got to find them. Let's tell them this. You come forward, we'll put you in the back of the line, pay your fine, get in line to become a citizen. Let's make that citizenship happen at a quicker pace, especially if they've been here and they haven't committed crimes, been paying taxes. Been here for 20 years, let's put them in the back of the line, let's get them in line to become a citizen. Again, English, they have to learn English, take the test just like everybody else. No amnesty. If they're here and they've committed a crime, export them, get them out of here. You realize what percent of our prisons are illegals? 38%. Get them out of here. What are we paying for their existence in our prisons for?
Amen.
Secure the borders and get rid of them. Thank you.
Well, that is definitely a hot topic. I think it's right behind Obamacare for this campaign. Bottom line, you can't do anything. There's so many great ideas out there, but you can't do anything until we do secure our borders. So I completely agree with Clint on that. That's where you gotta start. And working and coming from an agricultural background, I grew up on a farm. I know the importance of needing a workforce to be able to get here and pick our fruit so it doesn't just fall to the ground out of waste. And there are some great programs out there where folks can come legally, come with some sort of work visa, and there's different names for the programs, red tag, green tag, there's all sorts of great ideas out there. They come into our country, they help us get our crops picked, and then they go back. But this all hinges on a secure border, and until we can get a handle on that, it's really frustrating, especially at the state legislative level. I was able to get some funding in the budget this last year where our farmers and our agricultural sector are working hand in hand with the federal government as well as our state agencies trying to get a handle on this farm worker needs, as well as being able to get folks over the border and then back. But again, it all hinges on our federal government securing our borders, so that's got to be the top priority.
Thank you. We're a nation of immigrants, but we're not going to fix our problems by amnesty. First of all, no amnesty. Second of all, we have to get legal. We have to start following the law, and by that I mean we have to secure our borders, but we also have to have a Congress that is legal. The reason our borders are insecure and our immigration is in shambles is not because we don't have the ability or the resources to do it, it's because we're playing politics with unconstitutional entitlements, we're playing games to draw people across the border illegally, and because we have a lawless Congress who is not respecting the limitations that we the people placed upon them. I want to go back in time just a little bit, to April 17th, 1907, in Ellis Island, New York. Now, on Ellis Island that day, 11,200 people immigrated. When you immigrated to Ellis Island, you came out on the barge, and you spent 2 to 5 hours on Ellis Island, and you were then a permanent resident. Now, you weren't a citizen. You still had to learn the language. You still had to go through the process to become a citizen of the United States. Consider that contrasted to what we have now, where it takes 10 to 20 years to become a citizen or to immigrate into the United States, and yet you can come here illegally and we'll hand you freebies. We have to stop the lawlessness. We have to secure our borders. We have to have a Congress that will vote constitutional, because the reality is our borders won't be secured until we get a constitutional Congress, because they are purposely negligent in their duties in protecting our borders, as evidenced by their actions. We need to improve and streamline immigration, protect our borders, and keep America, America. Thank you.
Well, I'm a former military guy, so obviously I like security. Yeah, I think the first thing would be to secure our borders, right? Because once you do that, then you have control. Now that you have control of borders, now you can actually control intake and outtake. So the second thing is we do have to streamline the process. I did spend some time with the Yakima Police Department with the gang unit a couple of months back, and I asked them specifically, what are the issues with immigration? Because they work with these people every single day, right? And they said streamlining the process is one of the biggest solutions to the problem. The other thing is immigrants are paying coyotes up to $10,000 to get them across the border. Then they come over here and they work, and then they have to try to get back, right? So why aren't we taking and, again, streamlining the process so that immigrants can come through legally? They can apply for this, and they can be paying the U.S. government, which would help cover the cost of immigration coming in, right? And versus paying Mexican coyotes to get across the border. So now we've got streamlining, and now we've got additional revenue coming in to help also secure the borders. And so it's more of a win-win than definitely the situation that we have right now. Thanks.
What is the Federal Reserve, and how familiar are you with it? Should they be audited?
I don't know a ton about the Federal Reserve. Everything I have read about it makes me nervous. I'm sure a lot of you can agree with that statement. I'm not sure what's to be done about it. It seems like there has been a lot of attempts to try to dismantle it, a lot of attempts to fix it. I think it definitely needs to be audited. The fact that a government program can run year after year after year after year and never get an audit, it just baffles my mind. I work as an analyst, as you know, at Hanford, and everything I do in cost and schedule is cost and schedule related. So we get audits sometimes several times a year. The fact that the Federal Reserve has no audits going really makes me nervous. So yes, I do agree we should audit the Federal Reserve, and also looking at other programs to replace it. Thank you.
I won't claim to be the foremost expert on the Federal Reserve, but I can say a resounding yes, they should be audited. It's really a no-brainer. Now, the Federal Reserve, we see once again a large organization in the federal government that is overreaching. But I think at the core of our monetary problems, of the deficit of the $17 trillion in national debt that we have in the United States, It goes beyond the Federal Reserve. It goes to the lawless and unconstitutional spending in the federal government. It goes to our lack of responsibility. When your home is in foreclosure, you don't buy a castle. And that's the mindset that we seem to have in America. So we need to audit the Federal Reserve. We need to hold them accountable. We need to get back to money that means something. The framers would have never tolerated the fiat money that we have now. We need to get back to substantial standards like gold or silver or something like that. We need to work on restoring the foundations of America and getting back to something that has stability and that can keep our economies and our communities strong. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, first off, maintaining a strong economy, you have to base it off of sound monetary principles. And I think we have a lot of work to do in that area when it comes to our federal government. And the Federal Reserve has not only a direct impact on our economic activity, but also inflation. And we not only need to audit the Federal Reserve, but we need to audit it annually. And then there is the trick of how do we do these audits so that there's no political pressures on it. Because you've seen it happen in government before. I've seen it a lot at the state level where you'll have a state agency that says, oh yeah, I'll get audited. And then you go read the RCW and realize that the way they propose to get audited is that they audit themselves. And of course, you guys know that's no way to do business. So bottom line, we need to audit it. It needs to happen annually. We need to ensure that there's no political pressures involved in that process. And bottom line, when it comes to sound monetary policies, this is one of the reasons I'm running, is that I can't look my little 18-month-old son in the eyes and feel good about not trying to run for Congress and make a difference, because we are laying so much debt on the next generation's shoulders. $17 trillion of debt currently that I have to run to try to make a difference. And I don't know about you folks, but we need more folks in Congress that do what you and I do, that know how to balance a checkbook, that remembers whose money they're spending. And that's one thing I've been proud to be able to say, is I've never forgotten who my bosses are, and you can count on me to run and get a balanced budget amendment adopted to make sure we're having annual and true and fair audits on the Federal Reserve, and trying to look out for the next generation so that they're not going to be inheriting a legacy of debt. Thank you.
Well, I got to talk to Dr. Paul about this, and we all know that the Federal Reserve was dreamed up by a bunch of wealthy men. And it's a way of really tricking the people of this great nation. We're here in 17 trillion. When you add in the unfunded liabilities to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, we're 120 trillion in the hole. And here's a little analogy. 1 billion seconds ago, who can tell me how long ago 1 billion seconds? 1 billion. 1959. I'm 1 billion seconds old. Your heart, if you live to 70, will beat 2.5 billion times. 1 billion minutes ago, Jesus Christ was walking on the face of the earth. It's 1,000 billion to make a trillion. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the crisis for America right here. If we don't get our house in order, I say we audit the Fed and then we abolish the Fed. Let's get back on the gold standard. Let's get back to a sound currency. Because if we don't, this is the avenue that they're going to use when we can't pay our bill, when China calls the note, to fall into the one world government. Mark my words. Thank you.
What's your view of federal land management, specifically BLM and USFS?
Again, we're talking about agencies, ladies and gentlemen, that were created by executive orders from presidents. They have no jurisdiction over we the people. All the laws that are put into place were supposed to be put in by the House of Representatives and the Senate, and then signed by the President. We have these agencies, EPA. It was developed by Richard Nixon with an R by his name, December 2nd, 1970. We have one as far as back as Ulysses S. Grant, the National Marine Fisheries Service, February 9th, 1871. These agencies are created by executive orders. They have no jurisdiction over you and I. We need people to go back to D.C. to help take these agencies, defund them, and then get rid of them. Because these agencies are crippling us. I just got done meeting with the American Lands Council. Do you realize, if you can see America, and how much of the red in the West is owned by the federal government? And when we become states, we have the right to that land. They have never relinquished it. We have to pursue that, ladies and gentlemen, because then we get the tax dollars for our schools. Then we get the tax dollars for our roads. But we get rid of all those agencies too, and we keep it here within the states, our 10th Amendment. And we prosper, and we grow, and we pay down our debt. We're responsible Americans, because we all balance a checkbook. Thank you.
What are your top 3 priorities if elected? Our next congressman.
Well, first off, I would be elected as your congresswoman.
Whoops.
Sorry, no. Bottom line, top 3 priorities, they're pretty easy. We've already kind of covered them through your questions, which have been great. Obamacare, repeal, replace, restore the private market insurance with consumer-driven solutions, and protecting your wallets. So for me, and I've kind of already explained a little bit throughout some of these other questions, but bottom line, the reason I'm running is I want to make sure that we have a positive legacy to pass on to our next generation, to my son, your children, your grandchildren, the next generation. And part of that legacy that we're failing on right now is the fact of the amount of debt that's on their shoulders. And so I will lead the charge, like I did in Washington State, to adopt a balanced budget amendment. And folks, when we tried to do this a couple years ago, we've been trying for a while, and we accomplished it. I remember at the time, Governor Gregoire looked me straight in the eye and said, Senator Holmquist, this is never going to happen. And I said, oh yes, it is. I've got faith. We worked it hard, and we became the first state in the nation to adopt a 4-year constitutional balanced budget amendment. And if we can get that accomplished in liberal Washington State, we can get it accomplished at the federal level, and I'm going to work to make that happen. And then the third thing would be, and one of my personal passions, and it's tied directly to the economy, but as the chair of the Commerce and Labor Committee, I continue to have as a top priority is private sector job creation. And not only am I the business leader for the Senate Republican Caucus, but I grew up on a farm, so I know firsthand how unelected bureaucrats, they're not accountable to you folks, how they are clearly overreaching in organizations and in agencies such as the EPA. So we've got to lift that government red tape and not force employers to throw money out the window that could instead be invested in creating jobs. So I look forward to working on those 3 issues and others. Thank you.
Thank you. 3 top priorities. Number 1, day 1, is 100% constitutional voting. Again, that's the foundation of any representative that we're sending to Washington. If they're not going to do that, they're not qualified to be there. Number 2 is to start conversations on a national level with other representatives who value the Constitution and start working with people that will actually uphold the laws of this nation so that we can start restoring it, restoring our jobs, restoring our economy. Number 3 is to start addressing head-on the damage that's already been done. The unconstitutional agencies, like the EPA, like the BLM. The laundry list that goes on and on and on that is lawless. We need to get legal in Congress. I was watching a train go by the other day, and I was sitting there waiting, and the engine went by, and I thought, well, there's the federal government and the Constitution, and then there's all these cars. Car after car, it just never ended, it just kept going. And I'm thinking, there's the federal government right there. Every one of those cars is another agency. It's more spending, it's more entitlements. So that number 3, but very important, is to start working together with other people who will uphold the Constitution. And to start ending the agencies and the spending, that constitutional foundation. It's the only way that will restore our liberty. It's the only way that will address the national debt and the deficit. It's the only way that will stop the Liberty train from driving off the cliff. Thank you.
So, number 1, my goal is to bring 5.5 million jobs back from overseas. That's about $320 billion in wages and $119 billion in tax revenue, because people who are paying or actually drawing out from unemployment right now will actually be paying into it, right? So that can be used to pay down the national debt, in addition to providing needed funding for our national infrastructure. I will implement this plan by introducing legislation to cut corporate taxes in half, if not by up to 100%, for any corporation that employs 100% of its workforce in the U.S. with no outsourcing. American corporations who send our jobs overseas are traitors to their homeland and should be treated as such. Number two, there is also too much money in politics that is counterproductive to the well-being of Americans. I will support legislation to pull money out of politics with all funding for elections coming from the public, because it is the public at large that should be represented, not the handful of billionaires. Number three, almost 50% of our national debt belongs to foreign nations. I want to eliminate foreign ownership of our national debt. Let's restrict foreign ownership of U.S. corporations, requiring that officers of U.S. corporations be U.S. citizens. I will support setting term limits on all U.S. representatives and senators, and let's eradicate lobbying altogether so that every average American now has an equal voice that is not trumped by the influence of money. I want to destroy the barriers that were set up by the two major parties that prevent third parties and independents from being players in many elections around the country. Let's put our homeland first and reshore our jobs, restore unity, and revitalize our economy. Thank you.
Number one, restore the rule of law. This Constitution is the supreme law of the land. It's what gives us our sovereignty. That's what we're missing. And hold people accountable for their destruction of this that are back there right now. Two, repeal Obamacare and replace it with what I've already told you earlier. Three, limit the size and scope of this federal government. This government was never intended to be this big and so intrusive into our individuals' lives that they're telling us our light bulbs and our toilets. I mean, come on, ladies and gentlemen. This government's out of control. Like I told you, get rid of the agencies. You get rid of those agencies, and you've unshackled the industries of this country. Oil and water, wood, you name it, agriculture. Right now, they're trying to shut me down here in the Columbia Basin with the white bluff splatterpot. They just designated U.S. Fish and Wildlife as an endangered species. And they attribute its demise to the South Columbia Basin Irrigation District. That's my livelihood. That's my children's future. That's why I want to go back to D.C. Get rid of these agencies and unshackle our country and let these industries run again and let us use our natural resources. Thank you.
I got $2,400 worth of tax dollars for not raising wheat. What a ripoff. Will you stop me?
You got $2,400 for not raising wheat. Will I stop you? I would say no. I'm not sure how else to answer that question. Perhaps someone else has a better answer at this point. Thanks.
There's an interesting question to throw out there. I'm glad that came up. You know, I think the short answer is yes on a federal level. If you want to work with your state legislators, and if you want to get something on a state level where they will give you money for not growing wheat, then we can have that conversation. But on a federal level, once again, we have to restore the rule of law. We have to get back to the Constitution. And the federal government has no authority to be involved in your wheat. So oftentimes people will say, well, if you say you're not for every subsidy out there, the farmers aren't going to like you. There's nothing better I can do for the agriculture in this district, for the farmers. There's nothing better I can do than working to get the federal government out of your hair. It's time to tell them to keep your hands off our families, our farms, our faith, and our freedom. Thank you.
Bottom line, I'm tired, and that's one of the reasons I'm running to be your congresswoman, is I'm so tired of sitting here in Washington State and seeing our federal government pick winners and losers. They are doing it left and right when it comes to our economy, and this is a prime example of them picking winners and losers. So yes, in the best case scenario, I think I would love it if we could have complete economic freedom, where you as an employer in your industry could be taxed fairly, which should be lower, of course, and that the government would not be picking winners and losers.
Stop me.
This is obviously the Farm Bill. I sat on the state committee for FSA for 8 years under Bush 41. The first question I asked was, what % of the Farm Bill is food stamps? Nobody in the room knew. There was 50 people in the room. Lady came back after lunch. She says, I'll have that information for you after lunch. She came back. 78% at that time, 78% food stamps, temporary assistance for needy families, child nutrition. 11% went to the farmers, and it was welfare. Absolutely, get rid of it. I quit participating in it in 2010. Gave my last check to the Alaska Healing Hearts, the veterans. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a travesty. I've never been so free before in my life as a farmer. I've never profited so much. I no longer have to go report my acres and be influenced by the government about what to plant. If you remember back in Bush's early days, it was plant wheat fence post to fence post. So everybody planted wheat. What did it do? It drove down the price of wheat till we lost all our drylanders. Now they came in with CRP. They're paying people not to farm. This is wrong, dead wrong. Get rid of the farm bill, and if they keep the child nutrition, the food stamps, let's call it what it is. It's a welfare bill. It's not a farm bill. This is an injustice to every farmer in America. Get rid of it. Thank you.
Where do you stand on foreign aid when our deficit is so high?
Well, I think that comes to mind Pakistan, for example. When we talk about foreign aid, I think there's a lot of things that we need to be looking at in our foreign policy is, does it have a direct impact on our U.S. security? And in many cases, when you're looking at some of our foreign aid options and the decisions that are being made by your federal government, it doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. And the example I use is Pakistan. So here we've got Afghanistan, and then we've got this country right next to it, Pakistan, who is now harboring and becoming a magnet for terrorists to come. And yet our federal government is sending $4 billion of your taxpayer dollars to Pakistan. And I think it's past time that we say no more, unless they can prove that they've got rid of their nuclear weapons and they are not harboring these terrorists, the same terrorists that were in the Afghanistan hills plotting against our America and planning to kill us on 9/11. Those are the same folks that are now being harboring in Pakistan. So bottom line, we've got to be looking at whether or not there is a U.S. security connection. And in examples such as Pakistan, when you've got $4 billion of your taxpayer money going to a proven country that's got nuclear weapons and harboring terrorists that want only bad things for Americans and death, we've got to stop it. And I would be your warrior at the federal level to make sure it happens.
Eliminate it. We can't afford foreign aid anymore, ladies and gentlemen. We're $17 trillion in the hole. Like I said, $120 trillion in the hole if you add up everything else. We cannot afford it anymore. People are going to say, well, you're pretty harsh. Well, let's ask one question as an American people. Who is the most kind and generous nation in the world when somebody has a catastrophe? Who steps up to the plate? We do. America. We don't need the federal government telling us where to send our money. Goodwill of men and women. We are the most generous nation. So let's let the people decide where the money needs to go. Let's remember a couple of our founding fathers who said, George Washington, no entangling alliances. I say get the UN out of the United States and get the United States out of the UN. Stay a sovereign nation. Thomas Jefferson, friends of liberty everywhere, but guardians of ours alone. How are we going to be guardians of our nation if we're bankrupt? We got to face the facts, folks. We can't afford this bill anymore. We got to stop it. It's got to be cold turkey. Stop foreign aid.
Well, I'm going to second what Janea said. First, American security, right? Once again, being an ex-military guy. So if foreign aid is being used to stabilize our security, then obviously we have to use that. But if it is not being used for security purposes, that's where I go back to my message of homeland first. Because we're putting everything else, everyone else's interests before our own homeland, right? We're shipping the jobs overseas. We're not taking care of our own people first. So if we're sending foreign aid over, and if we're shipping our employment over, then obviously there's a problem with our lawmakers. And I think it really goes back to, honestly, money. Because we have top funders who go and support campaigns with millions of dollars, and there is no representation from the people at the bottom, right? The majority of us, the middle classers. Because once you start running for Congress, you're not going to make it. You're not going to make it unless you have the backers of millions of dollars that come from big corporations, multinational, unpatriotic corporations to boot.
My neighbors. If we want to help out other nations as individuals, we can certainly do that. America has a compassionate spirit, and we've always helped our neighbors. But when you're broke, you don't keep spending more and more and more. We have to start getting responsible. We have to cut off the foreign aid. And we can be supportive of other nations without sending them money that makes them beholden to us, without playing politics and taking the taxpayers' money and spending it on things that we have not authorized them to do. So, short answer, in the foreign aid. Thank you.
The Columbia Basin Project is the largest economic development project in the history of Washington State. What do you know about the East High Canal, and how do you plan to help move forward with this project?
Personally, I'm not an expert on the subject.
Not about the East High Canal. I've been your warrior at the state level to get the funding for the East High Canal. And as we know, this was a dust bowl before we were able to get water out to the fields so that we could grow. And water is the lifeblood to economic development and private sector job creation. And this project is at the heart and soul of the Columbia Basin.
In place, been in order to be completed for many years, but it hasn't. Because we haven't got the funds from the federal government. I'm like Gavin, we shouldn't be looking for the federal government to complete this. It should be a state issue. Why hasn't it been pursued? Well, first of all, let's look at about the rest of the Columbia Basin. What we're facing as farmers. I already told about the White Bluffs bladder pod. Now we got the buffers they're talking about. If we put in the East High with open canals and they want 1,000-foot buffers, we're already going to lose 73% of our farm ground in the Columbia Basin. We've got to address these first, folks. We got the Endangered Species Act that's crippling us. We're on the verge of losing our ability to farm. The Grand Coulee was put in, yes, it was a federal project. And, you know, the argument there is, well, boy, you're living off of it. No, we're not. We're paying it back. Every year we pay our water assessment for the water delivery to our farms. We don't farm unless we pay that money up front. So we pay that money up front. We're paying off the construction and delivery of water from Grand Coulee. This was a great master plan. The East High should be completed. But again, it should be completed within our state. We're allotted 3% of the Columbia flow to farm. When I was growing up, when we were real irrigation, we used 2.3% of the water. Today, with pivot irrigation, we're so conservative, we're down to 2% of the water. We have 1% left over that could go to the East High. So I'm all for it. And have you looked in the store lately at your food prices? Ladies and gentlemen, they're skyrocketing. Meat prices, everything across the board are up. Fox News was going over it today. We need the East High up and operating. But again, we need to keep it as a state issue. We paid for it within our state. We'll profit from it in our state. Thank you. Two other races. I ran for the U.S. Senate and I ran for Lands Commissioner. Both of them were an educational process, and I learned a wealth of knowledge, especially about our natural resources in Lands Commissioner and how we're frivolously losing our natural resources to pine beetle, spruce bugworm, and nothing's being done about it, ladies and gentlemen. Our government knows how to do one thing well, and that's squander our wealth and our resources. We have to shrink the size of this government. I've laid out a plan with you tonight of how I intend to do it, introducing bills and working with other people. I'm not going back to Washington to make friends. I'm going back to push this conservative constitutional agenda by us, the grassroots. Thank you.
Well, I too thank you for this opportunity, and again, this has been one of the greatest honors of my life to serve you in the Washington State Legislature, and I want to earn your support to be your Congresswoman in the 4th. Bottom line, I've been to bat for you on so many issues: Eca Chemicals, REC Silicon, Columbia Basin Project, your property rights, your constitutional rights. I had to fight to even allow us to say the Pledge of Allegiance at one point before we opened up over in the Senate and the House. I want to take that proven track record and go to battle for you at our federal level. I think there's a lot at risk right now. I'm doing it for my son and your children and your grandchildren so that we can protect the American dream, so that they have the same opportunities that you and I have had. And not only do I have that proven track record to back up my promises and my commitments to you, but I've shown that you can stand strong to your core principles, yet still get things accomplished. Again, I'm your only state senator that has never voted for a tax increase. I'd appreciate your support and your vote. Thank you.
I want to thank you all for being here tonight. I hope you'll pick up a copy of the Constitution from the table back there, a bumper sticker, a sign, whatever. It's important that we remember that liberty is not the fringe. Liberty is the foundation. It's what this nation was built on. You need to challenge your candidates at all levels of office. Make sure that they're upholding that Constitution, from your sheriffs to your representatives to your congressmen, but especially on that federal level, make sure they understand this. This is not a state office, and they don't get to be mandating the things that are state level issues. The framers gave us a system. They spilled their blood for it, and they expected us to be the sentinels of that liberty. Let's make sure for our children and grandchildren that we're doing that. Thank you. Let me know if you have any questions.
So let me start with reading something that I wrote and I put on my card that you can put back, that you can pick up back there. The parties, speaking of the Democrats and Republicans, are so caught up in victory for their party, they forget they should be fighting for the victory of the people. The two major political parties are now outdated and irrelevant, and their divisive nature a detriment to those they have failed to represent. Groupthink now outweighs intelligence, and the game has become greater than the cause. I am running as an independent because I want to do something different. I hope that you will consider, when you're voting and when you're talking to your friends and family, that all the problems that we are having right now may not necessarily be pointed just at the government, but the people who are running it. And that goes back to the parties. I have a plan. I'm an analyst. I have a master's degree in management, and that's what I do for a living. I'm a veteran, and as you can see, I'm already starting to work on that plan. Thanks so much for your time.
We tried to be very delicate with that. So